So thank you all for coming. We're going to proceed to our Brad Will portion of the evening tonight. And Dylan, do you mind if I introduce you to the audience? There's Dylan Hawk from Watching the Wheels, a really great online poetry zine, which is at, is it at www.watchingthewheelsofblackbird.com?
.blogspot.com.
And it's also, you can go to MySpace/Watching the Wheels. Is that right? He asked for permission to record. I almost said videotape, but this is the age of DV, so he wanted to record the readings and post it on his poetry website. And so if anyone has any objection to being recorded for the rest of the night, please tell me in advance and I'll ask him to turn off his camera, or we'll make it easy. Out of the rest of the people that are signed up to read, including Mark Ducharme, do any of you guys have any objection to being recorded? Okay, and I sent out 50 or 100 emails inviting people to the Brad Will Memorial reading, and I got a couple emails back saying, dude, why don't you tell us who Brad Will is, or who's Brad Will, or why is he being memorialized, or what did Brad Will have to do with poetry? And so I thought I'd give you guys a quick primer. As Brad Will was a 36-year-old person who used to read at the poetry readings, this series quite often in the mid to late 90s, 93, 94, 95. He was a summer writing program student in Europa. And since then, he's been involved full-time as being an activist in all over the North America and maybe further. Friends with most of the teachers at Europa and most of the people that came to the readings at Penny Lane in the 90s. And he was killed by the police in Mexico about 10 days ago. Is that right, Joe? Pardon me?
2 Fridays ago.
Yeah, so is it 10 days ago or 17 days ago? 10 days ago, and he was an independent journalist videotaping the protests in Oaxaca, Mexico, and for indiemedia.com or indiemedia.org. And there were some teacher strikes down in Oaxaca that became a big political thing, bigger than just the teacher strikes. And he was one of 5 people that was killed that week, and he was shot by the police, who were photographed directly before and after shooting him, and I guess the president of the state has helped them hide, and they haven't been apprehended, and they believe that the government in Mexico is helping them hide. And since he was a journalist when he was shot, this attracted the attention of journalists and people all over the world. It was covered in the New York Times on the front page 3 days in a row. And the ambassador to Mexico said that journalists should feel safe anywhere in the world, and that there's a call to arms saying that people should get behind this cause and try to raise the awareness of not shooting at journalists during wars and police actions and protests and everything. And also the Zapatista leader, how would you pronounce that, Joe, his name? Do you know? The Zapatista leader issued an open statement to the people saying that Brad was on the bus, meaning he was behind them and he was supporting all the oppressed people in the world that needed to protest, and that since he got killed in this terrible way, that everyone in the world should get behind this issue. And they said that the international media wasn't following these protests in Oaxaca, even though it was keeping 1.2 million children out of school, and it was a huge international issue that the straight quote-unquote media wasn't covering. And so he was my friend, and he was friends with some of the people in the audience, and he was a really good guy and very enthusiastic about helping the oppressed. And he was squatters' rights was his main thing in New York that he was getting behind. And he was quite an individual. And it said in the paper that he was an Europa graduate. I know that he wasn't, only because I wrote his recommendation. And that year I'd recommended 3 people that didn't get accepted into the program. And I called over there and said, should I stop writing people recommendations? Because everyone I recommended this year was turned down. They were probably the only people turned down that year. It's like, is my recommendation hurting their chances of getting into school there? And Ann Waldman said that they couldn't do anything with glowing recommendations because it didn't really help if you said a lot of nice things about a person, because it didn't really help them figure out what kind of person they were, you know. Which is nothing against Ann. She's a great person, and she'll be paying tribute to Brad in New York at St. Mark's Church, where they're doing a 5-hour thing for him there on the 11th of this month, which is probably Saturday. And maybe they'll record that. But Brad was all those things, and a good guy. And my contribution to the night is that one of the other persons that didn't get accepted in Naropa that year was Jeff Bauer, this guy who I felt so guilty that he didn't get into Naropa that year that I gave him a job at my store. And he was like the least employable person that ever lived. He has 3 kids now, and he still has never had a full-time job in his life, unless you count working at the Beat Bookshop 4 hours a day. But he came out from Michigan in 1993 to come to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. He stopped in Telluride on the way back to Boulder. He was coming down McClure Pass, and the brakes went out on his 10-year-old car that he paid $400 for, and he scraped his car against the mountain to a stop and survived, luckily, you know, for his 3 kids and stuff like that. And so he pulled over on the side of the road and stuck his thumb out. And he's a clean-cut, good-looking kid that doesn't look like he could harm a fly. And all the people in Colorado drove by him, you know. And then a van pulled over and opened the door full of marijuana smoke. And Brad Will and his friends picked up Jeff and drove him to Boulder, where he was going from McClure Pass, and left. You know, he left his car, I think, on the side of the road forever. But he, you know, called the other day and was like crying about Brad and how nice this guy was to pick him up hitchhiking. And so that's just one of like the things of Brad being a nice enough guy to trust a stranger to pick him up, you know. Whatever you do, though, don't go picking up hitchhikers because you heard this story, because I know people that were also killed by hitchhikers and stuff like that. So you know, it's a true story. So Jeffrey Miller's brother was killed when he was picked up hitchhiking. So Brad was a good guy, and a lot of people are gonna read poems and dedicate their poems to him tonight. And we lost another person this week, Larissa Strickland, who played guitar at the Poets Readings a few times in the early 90s with the Laughing Hyenas. She was 40 years old, and she died of an accidental overdose this weekend. But she also was another person that died this week that participated in the Poetry Readings in the 90s. So to Larissa and Brad, we're going to dedicate the rest of the night to Brad, and I'm going to dedicate a minute to Larissa. And our first poet in this portion of the evening is going to be Ola Tunji. Let's have a nice warm welcome for Ola Tunji.
I'm going to invite Clip Locks up here to help me. Prelude to Chance is a movie. Our days were grand, even in their illusions. And the evening felt warm, especially naked. I relished the touch of air flooding over my skin, my hair a field of wheat, waves, beautiful, vast. What if everything ever already occurred, and we find ourselves only on a few frames instead of the stars we would like ourselves to be? We are flip books purchased for 10 cents at the corner store. Our lives move like waves of grain, beautiful, vast only in the boundless ocean of imagination. Chance is a movie. The significance of chance cannot be overrated. As a movie, you may see a left made yesterday led to the right I made today, which made me 10 minutes late for the bus which crashed into a semi. It was all chance, you may say. I might have easily have died that day, only 10 minutes off. You may see the chance to be born here and now as astronomical. What lessons would life teach you if chance had made your movie mine and mine yours? What if your movie began in Afghanistan? Your parents, they were the only love I knew, screamed the child, had been shot by an American GI. Would freedom still ring in the soundtrack of your life? What would you learn of freedom? The Palestinian child said, "They knocked on my door." It opened slowly. A movie ensued. Chaos along with nightmares, the loss of innocence, and a little bit of hell ensued. The coin flipped. It came up tails. Chance strapped a bomb to your young body. Chance assured you that vengeance was yours for the taking and you would be a saint. The movie ended abruptly to the sound of screams, broken glass, a deafening boom. Chance made sure it was either you or them. The movie had ended. Recycled hate ran rampant. Death became a way of life. Chance had made sure right and wrong had no say in the matter.
Curates the Left Hand series, which is now at the Dairy, and she's a writer and also is friends with Brad Will, and she'll be our next reader tonight. Let's have a nice warm welcome for Laura Wright.
Terry and Michael Martinez will be reading at 7:30. It's at the Dairy in the lobby. The Dairy is on Walnut and 26th. I have 2 short poems and I'll probably start crying, which I'm going to do now. Sorry, just have to, I'll just read while I cry. And this first poem was written this weekend, watching Brad's last footage. And it's called, very appropriately, A Few Words for Brad Will. This once or twiceness, that is not inevitable. This once or twiceness as it has occurred, and all that's definite is what will never happen, what will never be seen again. If death is senseless, life is senseless. Life is not senseless, and not senseless is fear, brilliance, anxiety, delight, is everywhere at once the furthering of possibility which occurs at each limb, at each point of the body, is an opening or a closing, often both. There is no rehearsal, but there will be many rehearings. Each definite moment will occur, occurs, will have occurred, and then we begin again. There is no substitute for touch. And this was written long ago, and it was actually written for Brad, though I never told him or anyone else that. And it's in this book of mine. It's in a series of poems called Deer, and it's Deer number 14. I remember biting down on the cord around your wrist, the cord biting into your skin as I tightened it, a fierceness of candlelit bottle framed by lack of electricity, begun with dissonance, high winds. Now this cord on my own arm tightens, my teeth dig in, I go out into the world, dancing, jangling, wind runs through me, candles blown out, daylight. Thanks.
Footage. I haven't been able to watch it yet, or I don't know if I'll ever watch it, but if you're doing research about him on the internet, they show the footage that he was shooting when he was shot. So if you couldn't handle seeing that, I don't know, you know.
It's not very graphic.
Okay. But I guess he cries out. Somebody warned me not to watch it. Jenny Heath told me not to watch it. But there's, if you got here late, you can watch, look at pictures of him on Democracy Now! And a bunch of other sites that by just looking for his name on the internet. And next we have Clint Locks, who read here a few minutes ago and is now reading here again. Let's have a nice warm welcome for Clint Locks. So let's have a nice warm welcome for Rob.
This first one I wrote after watching a Burger King commercial. It's called Have It Your Way. Tonight I count wild boars, their jaws caked with the blood of your recent behavior, and ice creamed by the sounds of my most recently lost battle. Love is a funny thing, and sometimes the punchline wears brass knuckles. You are a cold pillow, and the moon is an illiterate alarm clock. And I am a brand new definition of insomnia. Your cattles crave Burger King. My cattles crave your cattles. But as has already been pointed out in things, I am no longer welcome to this particularly franchised establishment anymore. You burned grill marks into my heartstrings, and I find no sanity in such pickles. My cattle stare down the plank of the legendary goodbye of your deep fryer. Your cattle stare down something else. In the end, they fought like warm potatoes, spurting chives towards the heavens, and they said goodbye like the glorious side dish in some tossed away restaurant that nobody orders. And then that was it. It was over. The stratosphere sobbing over unquenchably cold Chinese food and the unexpected betrayal of uncertain broccoli. On Earth, it is cold in the mountains, where dead slippers drunk dial in different cemeteries. She still thinks of him often. He still thinks of her all the goddamn time. And I'll end with a couple cut-ups. This one is from an interview with John Stamos from Showbiz Today. It's called Thank God for MySpace. I'm not a macho guy, you know, a Mr. So-and-so, and stuff like that. But I do all right with the ladies, you know. I roll into bed. I don't wear makeup. I go right in. My favorite pastime is dating some dude's ex-wife on MySpace. You know, she likes it hard. And, wait a minute, kind of mean. Layered, but in a good way. Luckily, my hammer weighs more than Mary Kate and Bob's dead sister combined. You know, I'm like, watch it, are you ready? And she's like, I see it, John Stamos, I'm ready. And when I can tell that she's really ready, then I give her the full house. Since tomorrow is election day, this is political. This is seriously one of the strangest interviews maybe I've ever read with Kim Jong-il. So this is a cut up with an interview from that guy. It's called Tell Me When I Say So. I would like to discuss reciprocity. I would like for you to go there, and in exchange, I will provide you with red wine and ministerial compensation. I will give you the impossible. I've been improving my font size since the 3rd anniversary of Park Chung-hee's assassination. I understand you know Rodum Signon. What is the Rodum Signon font size? I have heard that you know this. But if I did, I would ask him, are your fonts smaller than ours? And by fonts, I would mean font. And by ours, I would mean mine. And the answer to that is obvious. Rodin Signon is well known to exaggerate things. Our fonts are twice as large as Rodin fonts. And by our, I mean mine. And by fonts, I mean this bone that I'd like to pick with you. I am talking the strategic placement of organs against organs. And have I relayed to you completely that the sheer size of mine is nonsensical? I have? Of course. So you're interested. That's healthy. Shall you publish me first, or shall I publish you? Such vague words. Did you say me first? That's healthy. Just so we're clear, the sun may bend when I mount you. I practice sexual Confucianism. Don't worry, I'll explain later. Are we ready now? Let's beg.
First time, let's backstage. Yes, I'm reading for the first time. So, this poem is called Shepherd's Purse. I'd forgotten till now the pale green taste, the lonely cries of the peacocks, and the heart-shaped morsels of make-believe and playground drama. It was in Salzburg, far from the bells, but close to the river, that the memory returned to me while going out for cigarettes. It was waiting patiently amongst the bracken, in a vernal, vacant lot of para-hibernating grasses, stinging nettles, and the echoes of Nazi footfalls. Waiting, precious and tender, like a livid, drowned countenance, whispering in a broken English rusty from disuse, an elegant and pointed question. Who knew how lonely the truth was, far from the bells, but close to the river?
This one is called Satori in Rome. I just read Satori in Paris for the first time and sort of made an influence, I suppose. Because I equals we, I accept the blood on our hands, but herald the songs of light. In this, the eyes of 6 billion shine endlessly, and then shadow is only a furtive smile outlining the lips of some sort of god. I wrote this in the Milan Malpensa airport 5 days ago, waiting for a plane for 12 hours because I didn't want to get a hotel room because I was feeling cheap. Poetry is like Sunday morning, staggering half-blind, searching in a sterile airport for a missed connection. Poetry is a raging hard-on that ejaculates prematurely from a 15-year-old with a leg cramp. Poetry is a swan frozen in Italian morning fog. Poetry is a disoriented fruit fly trying to vainly drown himself in the remnants of a glass of wine. Poetry is a kiss. Poetry is a sick bed, night sweat fever dream. Poetry is a miscarried orange scent. Poetry is a bloody nose and a back full of mosquito bites. Poetry is giving a reverent ohm to a half-smashed scorpion as you finish the job. Poetry is a sweet pussy that opens wide, then curls. Poetry is chauvinism. Poetry is trust. Poetry is feminism. Poetry is dust sprinkling down from the celestial lights on high. Poetry is murder. Poetry is fear. Poetry is your best friend sleeping with your mother. Poetry is useless, but poetry can save the world. Poetry is the curling hair on Walt Whitman's phantom chest plucked by Ginsberg. Poetry is name recognition. Poetry is magic with a K. Poetry is coal. Poetry is Algerian children's dirty, thieving fingers. Poetry is fashion. Poetry doesn't give a fuck. Poetry is a simulacrum of a memory. Poetry is never looking back. Poetry is the grease stains on your blue jeans or the gold in your mouth. Poetry is waiting. Poetry is a unicorn flying over a village vomiting rainbows. Poetry is your best friend's smile. Poetry is admitting that you're wrong. Poetry is the eyes of a stranger looking at the ceiling of an airport bar. Poetry is silence.
Some of you guys knew Brad and some of you didn't, but last week after I heard about what happened, it was the first time in my life where I thought that they could someday, Brad could become a martyr for this cause, where it seemed like his life story instantly became a movie when he got shot, and I immediately thought that someday that some talented filmmaker could make Brad's life story into a movie and probably, you know, raise awareness of all this stuff to, and you know, I'm sure I'm not the only person that thought that, but and along the same lines, in politics, are you giving us a talk at Naropa on Thursday, David? Wednesday, the 8th, at what time? At noon? And is it free and open to the public, or where is it? In the PAC? So David Barsamian, who's interviewed Noam Chomsky more times than anyone else in the world, will be speaking for free at Naropa University in the Performing Arts Center, which we used to call the gym, at noon on Wednesday, and for an hour or for half an hour. Will it be open to question and answers afterwards? So definitely be there. I'm going to try to be there. And our next speaker, Joe Ritchie, went to Nicaragua with Allen Ginsberg, I think in about 1987. He's been a lifelong activist and a poet, and I think, you know, at one point in his life was probably more of a kindred spirit to Brad, whether he knew it or not, than anyone else. I'm sure if Joe hadn't got married and had kids, he probably would have been down there fighting with Brad in And so he's going to play a song and hopefully read a poem. Let's have a nice warm welcome for Mr. Joe Ritchie.
Sandalista, y felicidades a los sandinistas que acaban de ganar una elección. Hemos perdido un soldado, un buen tipo, que se llama Brad Will. Desde el viernes pasado he recibido muchos mensajes por correo electrónico desde Argentina, Nicaragua, también de México. We don't really read about it too much here in our press, but just today I got a photograph from an Argentine newspaper with a caricature of Brad Will holding a video camera it was just like a cartoon, and he was getting shot by one of those federales, or I think it was the state police from Oaxaca. And I do sense that there's a big outcry in Latin America about what happened to him. What paper? I think it's called Página 12. It's one of the dailies of Buenos Aires, and if I got online, I could bring it up and show you. How do you spell it? Página, well, it came in an email from a friend, Miguel Grinberg, who was one of the first translators of Allen Ginsberg's Howl in Argentina. And I've received messages from people there, people in Costa Rica, Taller de Lunes, in Nicaragua. People were surprised to learn that this guy was, part of our community too. It's a tough one to swallow. There's also the thought that when an American dies, about 50 journalists a year die in Mexico, but when an American dies, it's big news, and maybe his death really brought some international attention. And while the murderers aren't being rounded up, thrown into trucks or anything, there'll be fewer people getting taken out because he got taken down. This 20 years ago, I was in and out of Nicaragua, and then had the pleasure of traveling from here all the way to Tierra del Fuego by land, along maybe the same Gringo Trail that Brad did. But I think both of us went off the Gringo Trail a lot and heard a lot of stories, horror stories of people, hard-hit people, in the Southern Cone, all through Mexico. My wife and I, it's a strange honeymoon we had, a grant to go interview mothers of the disappeared in Buenos Aires. And I'm going to sing a song based on some of those tales, and I think it's out of the milieu that Brad Will knew well, I believe. Old strings. I don't do this too much. You gotta help me out? Oh, I just thought Well, they let him get so far to the right place where they could kill him. Put him under the rug, cold and snug, forgotten. Forgotten, said the poet to the policeman, when they've been praying for liberation, praying for revolution, hoping for it to come along and roll along and make them strong again. Well, they fingered him one day on his job, and they warned him. Then they blackballed him, and they jailed him, and they beat him. In the back rooms, under prisons, where nothing is written. But he was dreaming about revolution, tapping on the walls for revolution, singing for revolution. For so long, those walls, they turned to curtains, and they wave in the breath of the ages. The wheel that turns has no page to burn in a pile, 'cause something still burns for revolution. Been learning about their revolutions and wondering about it for so long, for so long, for so long now. Well, they blindfolded his father and they shot him. Raped his mother while he stood in the street just crying. He took his place in the sun with his brothers. Now he's signed up for the revolution. Lined up for the revolution. Watch. In the sun, in the south, oh, way down there. In the banana, and in the coffee, and in the diamonds. It's in the blood, they say, of the brown ones in our kitchens up here. But now the hotels are surrounded by revolution. Whole cities chanting for the revolution. Too many bones in the ground for the revolution. No, they're not just talking. This time, for some promises. Not just asking. This time, for some pocket change. We're shaking up the times for revolution. Bring it on, revolution, yeah. From Managua to Manila and our headlines. I guess it was 20 years ago I was with Ginsburg in Nicaragua, and then again in '87 when the Sandinistas had their first go-round. And Sunday they got another shot. They got Danielle, the first bank robber to become a president, is back in power, and it should be a very interesting scene. What happens? Can I get a sip of water from somebody before I try to? Hi, thanks, Tom. When there are a lot of Americans and people from all over the world going to help out the Nicaraguans, lift all boats, lift the poorest people up, and it was quite a moving experience. So this is from that trip. It's from a diary, really. I traveled around with a photographer, picked cotton, built 2 schools, met some Sandinistas. Walking through ruins. I'm walking through ruins in Managua downtown. Paintings on the wall, Sandinista down the hall. Calls from vendors to sell to the gringo boys. Barrio to barrio, drinking Coca-Colas from clear plastic bags. Taking pics of graffiti in El Rojo y Negro. I think I got it. ride from Leon, the butt of an AK is poking me in the hip. And dangling from a running board, Enrique with a barricada tucked into his back pocket. The headlines read, 5 more heroes are dead in Estali. Well, the buses will be crowded onto the front tonight. On top of a volcano, rose in puffs of gray-blue smoke. Taking a toke, the tour guide, he spoke of a tale from long ago. A legend is told, they once threw a virgin in here once a year. And it's the blood of the virgin, he said, that will save our land. Alone, alone, I'm roaming the streets of Matagalpa, smiling at the old ladies and sneaking a sip of the old man's rum. Freedom, my friend, freedom defined in an afternoon in the sun. Afternoons guarded by the barrel of their guns. Sleeping on a beach, faint hum of a radio, it's playing Michael Jackson, and they're talking in Sandanese mode. The stars within reach and the lights of the fleet, de los imperialistas. My brothers from Kansas, rocking and rolling on the bows of mighty ships. Oh, you drunken sailors, it is time to go home. Well, Enrique, Ichepe, Yolanda, Gustavo, and Carlos Fonseca, let me tell you, life can get hard, life can get hard, living in the belly of the beast. Well, I went to Nicaragua instead of paying off my own landlord with my last $300, still keeping me in from the rain.
Last time I saw him when he was in my store, he was telling me about the squatters' rights things they were doing in New York, and I just remember that very moment thinking, man, this is for real, this isn't playing around, you know, like the New York police don't play around. And at the time when he first started getting involved in that stuff, Eric Drucker, this friend of Allen Ginsberg's, who was friendly here in town with a lot of people, had made this big naked lady standing over the streets of the Lower East Side with like tanks at her feet. And when I went to visit New York in 1995, this Eric Drucker image was all over, plastered all over New York. I'd never seen any image more prevalent, because Allen Ginsberg was doing a reading to benefit the squatters' rights for this building in New York, which had been squatted for many years, and they had taken for performances and poetry readings and music and people living there, and it had been squatted for about 10 consecutive years, and then the owner decided to renovate it, and the police in New York were really serious, and Alan went to do a reading in the basement of this place, And the people came out, and it was unbelievable, you know, them getting behind these issues. And at the same time, Joe, maybe you could help me with this, but there was what was the name of the street that Alan lived on? 14th, East 12th Street? Where he was living in New York, there was an empty lot with a fence around it, and this filmmaker wanted to use it in a film, so they made it into a park by bringing in sod and trees and bushes and jungle gyms and swings and all this stuff, and made this empty lot into this beautiful park on Allen Ginsberg Street. And they'd spent, you know, how much ever you spend on $50,000 making it into a pretend park so they could film in this park in New York City. And when they were done doing it, the people in the neighborhood said, "Can you leave it like a park?" And the mayor of New York and at the time and all the people said they couldn't, because then they would be held responsible if anyone fell out of a tree or fell off the jungle gym, and they were going to tear the park down and turn it into an empty lot again. And they got behind this. I never knew what happened, but there was really these issues that went from being seemingly absurd to these really serious issues. And I remember just thinking about how I got some emails this week about this reading where people emailed and said, dude, he should have stayed out of Mexico, you know? And I don't think he was naive at all. I think he knew what was going on, and I think he was risking his life in a serious way, not just in a way that he wasn't aware that these things could happen to him there. And my wife is real down to earth, and I was telling her the other day that they let these police go, you know, like the police got away and they didn't catch them or try to prosecute them for shooting this guy. And she looked at me and said, well, that happens everywhere, you know. And at first I thought, oh, no, it doesn't. And then I realized that she was right, that it could happen in Texas or in Colorado or anywhere in the world, that if the government stands behind its police even when they make a mistake, you know. And I can't imagine, I never could imagine this situation sad as it is. And we have, Mark Ducharme's going to come up and read a couple poems, and then Darren Mueller is going to read some articles that were written about this event, hopefully fill people in the audience that are. So first, let's have a nice warm welcome for Mr. Mark Ducharme.
And Laura, you remember the summer you left? 99. Was it 99?
Yeah.
Okay. They were written in the summer of '99 during the summer writing program. And what was going on was Bernadette Mayer, whom many of you know, and whose work I hope all of you know, was giving a workshop. And she was giving a workshop that involved the ingestion of a beverage that was rumored to have some drug-like properties, which pissed off Ann Waldman later when she found out. And some of us were around. None of us, neither Brad nor I nor Danica at the time, were students in the program. Danica and I are both MFA graduates, and Brad, as Tom has told you, was a student in the writing program, but he never graduated. So we were there, we were present, and we decided, you know, we were not part of this workshop. We decided to conduct our own workshop, and we met at Bernadette Mayer's the hotel room, and I remember Brad was helping prepare the beverage, and I think Brad probably had some of it. I think I had the opportunity to and declined, and I don't know whether Danica did or not. And we went, while this workshop went off to do what it did, we went and to a picnic table or something on the Naropa campus and conducted our own workshop and wrote these poems. And I noticed that two of them are acrostics to the word intruder, and I guess we were the intruder workshop because I guess we felt like intruders because sometimes at the summer writing program they're a little bit touchy about outsiders being around who were not paying guests, and we were certainly that at that time. So these are the poems we wrote, and I think I might even be reading them in the order they were sort of written in. The first one is called Strobe Cursor, and these first two are the acrostics to the word intruder. Internal manipulation of image negated the strobe screen text, taxing our ability to perceive the image as regenerative, and thus, under asphalt rumblings, white noise turns down the volume on the text of excess, emptying flesh of spontaneity, refuse the toll, taking steps first to break the ground. The eye returns. Interlope fantastic brunch, noting Palomino's skyscapes, turning to open mouth, spill out sunspots, run, you sucker, under the jungle trestle, derail your certainty, your born screech, eating unborn dérèglement pussy, regulating attachment disorders. Jazz ignition. A bird, three simple notes like jazz, complex noise swings a silent bird to fall. A dinosaur intricately sneezes, cockroaches blatantly inhale sweet breezes. Foul wind hides a beetle's blow, sweet shit sprinkles o'er the sidewalks, a dense fog sags in the mountains. The heartland sweeps dry air, a bowl-shaped breeze. A breeze not shaped by anything, wasteland's booty. Songs formed from broken stars, heaven's refuse. Earth-born fire, healed from a whisper trail. Earth, wind, and fire hacking through acid trails. Sky, water, ash, calms, sweet underbrush descend on a city, curling green cash to seed, citing the need to dispel poverty options, ignoring the senselessness of igniting the upper class. This is the last poem we wrote together. It was, as I recall, the favorite of all three of us. And then after I read this, I'm going to read one more poem that's my own that I wrote for Brad. I forgot to mention, Brad Will died on my birthday. So this poem is called Hitscape, and this is the last of the collaborative poems. Extreme marking on the wind rears or arrears, marking reverie cooking, pomegranate reverie for weary travelers, ears verse every car spinning foul ball or play reverses intricate spell check. Heck, we all sever our resources, calling source sap counted turn, countering hostile stilled breeze, but stills the countless hiss. We count the hapless strangers as friends, spilling hitless disco cantos, discover haunting centers of refuge, courting license to cover weeds, licentious as hissing refugees, as history takes liberty with urge. Sewer eyes peer surging twilight creep, legibly as uncounted seers. Thanks. For Brad Will. With a camera to record it, to invent, to trouble. Trouble as in any reflection. Brad Will, taken from the picture. Was it for truth's brutality or an accident of beauty? Let's invent heaven, since I don't believe. But let's invent heaven so Brad can be there. Brad Will, gangly enthusiasm, pirate radio on Nueva York. I told my daughter, I knew someone who died last weekend, was killed last weekend. Why? For taking pictures. Why would anyone be killed just for taking pictures? I don't know why. I know why, but don't. Or how to reply. Memory is troubled reflection, troubled by imagination, by image making. Brad Will, friendly troublemaker, let's make a heaven like you saw. Let us, unflinching, remember. Thank you.
Here in the 80s, he does this thing called Peace Jam where he introduces the Nobel Prize winners to high school kids, and it started in Denver, and they just had their big 10-year anniversary. And the little girl that was killed in the mountains by the person that took hostages, you know, like last month or something, she had just been to Von Savanjev's Peace Jam thing with these Nobel Peace Prize winners. And he was emailing me about it a few weeks ago when it was the anniversary of another friend of mine's death, and I emailed him back and said, you know, email me about anything, but could you please stop emailing me about this poor girl that was killed because I can't handle it right now, you know? And then a few days later, Brad died, and it's just like, if you just can't handle death, I guess there's no business for us in the world, because it seems to be everywhere all the time. And really, this whole situation seems really unbelievable. And Darren Mueller is going to read some stuff that was written on the internet about Brad, and then the Brad Will part of the evening will be over, I believe. So let's have a nice warm welcome for Darren Mueller and his computer. Sure. Darren runs the readings which are now at the dairy with Laura.
Thanks, Tom. As Tom was saying, he asked me to read this piece that I was looking at actually a couple of days ago, which Brad wrote, and it was published in New York in Boog City in last year. And I came upon it when I was just trying to find out more about Brad and what he was up to. And basically what I came away with after reading, you know, just him talking about his life was that he was doing the same work in New York that he was doing in Oaxaca when he was killed. And I was just really amazed by his writing, so I wanted to read it. It's called Fragments of a Shattered Hope, Brazil Makes War on Sono Real Squatters by Brad Will. So this is written by Brad Will. The first time I ever squatted was almost an accident. I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and all of my crazy poet roomies fled the scene. I stayed and didn't have the phone number for the landlord. I came to the less looking for trouble, and I landed broke and confused on my friends. They took me in at the 5th Street squat, urban camping with water from the hydrant, bucket flush toilets, and unpredictable electricity. Eventually the city came with a wrecking crane, and I almost got knocked down with the building. The city didn't care that I was still inside trying to stop the horror. I floated to different squats in the hood for years and fought the good fight for housing, and I dug in deep and locked down in the community garden struggle. They stole my heart, those old tenements, and the simple captured plots of green freezes. Pure direct action. You are not talking politics and yelling in the streets. You are doing it, making it real, and sharing it with the community. Wanderlust eventually did me in. I reached South America as a media activist with contacts from IMC-istas. I met squatting at the Independent Media Center office in New York City. I visited MST, the Landless Workers Movement, rural encampments in Brazil, and saw a whole different side to squatting. I came to Goiânia, Brazil, after I connected with some great IMC media activists in Porto Alegre at the World Social Forum. They told me of a squatters' encampment called Sono Real, Real Dream, in their city within the interior of the country. The court fight got them nowhere, and they started to dig in. They surged on the abandoned land 9 months before, after the owner of the land hadn't paid taxes in over 30 years. A couple of months later, it was election time, and the governor promised them they could stay, and they started building for real. It was all talk. The first day I arrived in the city, I was still dazed from hard travel and hit the camp just as night fell. There was a pattern of nightly harassment that was escalating. The night before, the police had shot some rounds randomly to scare people guarding the barricades. And Brad was shot at a barricade in Oaxaca, and I was talking about this in Brazil last year. The barricades were inspiring, layers of tires piled in hermetic order, locking into each other vertically, and some of the moats with bamboo spikes and barbed wire. Near the barricades, people were at the ready. T-shirts for masks, some with slingshots and Molotov cocktails, but the norm was a nice big stick. Many of the warriors were in their teens and were excited, but they didn't really seem to know what was in store. Others were battle-hardened soldiers from other occupations in the region. There were 8 barricades, all of them guarded night and day. It got really dark without streetlights, and it was disorienting. 2 nights in a row, the police came to attack after midnight. Tear gas crept up, confusion and concussion grenades exploded everywhere. 2 nights in a row, the barricade burst into flames and lit up the night, and the community fought back, their silhouettes floating, blurring in pure black inside the inferno. Slingshots singing, fireworks spraying, a Molotov would miss its mark. The police brought it up with incendiary flares and rubber bullets. The second night, they used real bullets. They have such a distinct sound as they whiz by your head. Inside the camp, someone was screaming with a bullet wound clean through his bicep. A policeman was wounded. They vanished and the barricade kept burning for hours. No one knew if they would return in a few minutes or ever. We got no sleep. Daylight always came up strange and brilliant in the camp. So cruel was this beauty, the contrast at dawn, the sun smiling on the simple homes and the flowers opening their eyes, pineapple and banana trees, gathering water from the well, a black spot on the road where the tires had burned through. There was silence, but for a few feet, slowly making their way to work, to scrap through the trash for cardboard or for bottles and cans. The women were off to market, or the kids on their way to the school yawning. Life pulsed on just like the neighborhood next door. Poor folks were trying to get by, loving, arguing, cooking, and sharing. Some had settled in nicely, selling everything they owned to buy bricks and mortar. All of them were basically single-room dwellings with simple garden outside, yucca, squash, kudzu. Some were still camping in shanty tent with a black plastic roof. There was a communal kitchen that fed those who needed it. There were all sorts of Christians, lots of Catholics, tons of believers, evangelicals of a different breed than the bush voters back home. Everyone was so nice. I wasn't greeted with suspicion, but with a smile and a hand. You pass a small, simple home and they ask you in for coffee. It was great kindness, generosity, and dignity, in spite of the poverty they faced. They had built a dream in the dust, a new people's village, a giant squad, a community. That's probably a good place to stop unless you want me to keep going.
Keep going.
Okay.
Oh, we don't have any limit on time.
Okay.
It's great writing.
Isn't it? Night returned after rumors flying all day. They had a regular Bible revival rally with singing and little kids and a few politicians. It was beautiful, hands all raised in prayer for peace, for a new life. All the while, the paranoia was creeping and shattering, gripping your teeth. No sleep again, the morning dead quiet. Then an announcement on the loudspeaker, 30 trucks on the road, full of military police. The governor had promised 2,500 police, and they were on their way. People trickled into the main entrance, but there was no panic. Slowly the police closed the roads, slowly their buses filled the plaza, slowly they unloaded their human cargo. Inside, people sang the national anthem of Brazil. A group of women formed a line to pray hard and loud. Soon a large group joined them with children and white flags. The night warriors were not to be seen. The police formed blocks and started to move in with black and green battle paint, bulletproof vests, shields, and helmets ready for war. Everyone stood terrified, unsure of what to do. Suddenly we heard explosions behind our backs. There was gas inside the camp. The police were already inside shooting. Another explosion directly behind my back pushed my body forward and my ears started ringing. Everyone scattered in a panic. Military police with pistols drawn were right behind me, one of them kicking a woman. I ran, but there was nowhere to go. Shots whizzed past my head. I headed for the backyards and leaped through the yucca bushes, where I saw an open door and a welcoming hand inviting me in. Everyone was affected by the gas and in a panic. A little baby was vomiting. A man of the house opened the door and I started filming, and twice got shot by passing military police. They came screaming, but I could only understand bits and pieces. I was explaining I was a journalist from the USA. The police with their pistols pointed at my head didn't seem interested in my credentials. When they hit me, it was first in the back of the head, then one threw me down, then 3 or 4 kicked me, then one on top hard with his knee in my back. Then the plastic handcuffs like a vice. I got on my feet looking for my video camera. What the fuck happened? I stumbled dazed in the sun into a different group of police. One smacked me on the side of the head and almost sent me to the ground, except another was holding me up. Later I realized they were being gentle with me. The police came marching out in formation, singing songs, celebrating their victory. We will put a sword in your skull and drink your blood. Twisted, I looked into some of their eyes and saw darkness, cold, hard, soulless steel. Soon I was in the mayhem at the police station. The pain started to settle into the bone. There was a first aid area with puddles of blood starting to turn black at the edges. I saw people with stitches, broken arms, and bullet wounds in the head. They moved me along after 8 hours, cut me loose. Over 800 were arrested and the bulldozers were busy all night. People said they saw bodies being dumped in the water wells and thrown into burning buildings. People were shot in the head while on their knees. No one knew how many were still missing. At night, there were military ambulances leaving the encampment. IMC volunteers were at the hospitals, and these ambulances never arrived. People saw trucks full of dirt entering in the night and leaving still full of dirt and something else. A massive cover-up was underway. People working in the hospitals were afraid to talk with us. One later came forward in secrecy and told us there were 20 violent deaths reported in the morgue. On a normal day, there were only 1 or 2. In the jail, so-called leaders are being selectively pulled into special detention for interrogation. Children were looking for their parents. There were streams of refugees and no government plan for what to do with these people. They went to the Catholic cathedral to sleep and rallied in the morning. They gathered to write down the names of the disappeared. There was a mass funeral the next day. An undercover agent infiltrated and tried to arrest someone randomly and got beaten down by the crowd until his buddy fired over everyone's head. Only 2 official deaths were listed, but we may never know how many for real. People moved into 2 gyms across town for refugee housing. A young man looked me in the eye. "This is Brazil," he said. "It is not the north and the beaches of Rio or Carnival. Now you know the real Brazil." And that's probably a good place to stop. But you can read this on the internet. It's at bradwillbookcity.blogspot.com. But you can also find it by going to the Friends of Brad Will site. You can just Google that. Thanks.
David Kirschenbaum, who he edits Boog Lit, he was reading from that magazine. He was the secretary at this government office where John Kerry was working, and Douglas Brinkley, who had come out to visit Naropa a few times, called on the phone one day and said, I'm trying to set up an interview with Mr. Kerry tomorrow, and they put him through to John Kerry right away, and then the next day, David lost his job, and he was like thinking about the big, how people's lives go in different directions from, did you meet Douglas Brinkley when he was at Naropa? Went on to big things. So thank you all for coming and helping pay tribute to Brad. I know who you are, Gregory, and I'm aware that you want to read. Thank you for helping us pay tribute to Brad. Maybe we can just have a moment of silence for Brad, and then we'll go on with our evenings. About 10 days ago, is that right, Joe? Pardon me?
2 Fridays ago.
Yeah, so is it 10 days ago or 17 days ago? 10 days ago, and he was an independent journalist videotaping the protests in Oaxaca, Mexico, and for indiemedia.com or indiemedia.org. And there were some teacher strikes down in Oaxaca that became a big political thing, bigger than just the teacher strikes. And he was one of 5 people that was killed that week, and he was shot by the police, who were photographed directly before and after shooting him. And I guess the president of the state has helped them hide, and they haven't been apprehended. And I believe that the government in Mexico is helping them hide. And since he was a journalist when he was shot, this attracted the attention of journalists and people all over the world. It was covered in the New York Times on the front page 3 days in a row. And the ambassador to Mexico said that journalists should feel safe anywhere in the world, and that there's a call to arms, saying that people should get behind this cause and try to raise the awareness of not shooting at journalists during wars and police actions and protests and everything. And also the Zapatista leader, how would you pronounce that, Joe, his name? Do you know? The Zapatista leader issued an open statement to the people saying that Brad was on the bus, meaning he was behind them and he was supporting all the oppressed people in the world that needed to protest, and that since he got killed in this terrible way, that everyone in the world should get behind this issue. And they said that the international media wasn't following these protests in Oaxaca, even though it was keeping 1.2 million children out of school, and it was a huge international issue that the straight quote-unquote media wasn't covering. And so he was my friend, and he was friends with some of the people in the audience, and he was a really good guy and very enthusiastic about helping the oppressed. And he was squatters' rights was his main thing in New York.
Easily have died that day, only 10 minutes off. You may see the chance to be born here and now as astronomical. What lessons would life teach you if chance had made your movie mine and mine yours? What if your movie began in Afghanistan? Your parents, they were the only love I knew, screamed the child, had been shot by an American GI. Would freedom still ring in the soundtrack of your life? What would you learn of freedom? The Palestinian child said, "They knocked on my door." It opened slowly. A movie ensued. Chaos along with nightmares, the loss of innocence, and a little bit of hell ensued. The coin flipped. It came up tails. Chance strapped a bomb to your young body. Chance assured you that vengeance was yours for the taking, and you would be a saint. The movie ended abruptly to the sound of screams, broken glass, a deafening boom. Chance made sure it was either you or them. The movie had ended. Recycled hate ran rampant. Death became a way of life. Chance had made sure right and wrong had no say in the matter.
Curates the Left Hand series, which is now at the Dairy, and she's a writer and also is friends with Brad Will, and she'll be our next reader tonight. Let's have a nice warm welcome to Laura Wright.
Terry and Michael Martinez will be reading at 7:30. It's at the Dairy in the lobby. The Dairy is on Walnut and 26th. I have 2 short poems, and I'll probably start crying, which I'm going to do now. Sorry, just have to. I'll just read while I cry. And this first poem was written this weekend, watching Brad's last footage. And
So thank you all for coming. We're going to proceed to our Brad Will portion of the evening tonight. And Dylan, do you mind if I introduce you to the audience? There's Dylan Hawk from Watching the Wheels, a really great online poetry zine. which is is it at www.watchingthewheelsofblackbird.com?
.blogspot.com.
And it's also, you can go to MySpace/WatchingTheWheels. Is that right? He asked for permission to record. I almost said videotape, but this is the age of DV, so he wanted to record the readings and post it on his poetry website. And so if anyone has any objection to being recorded for the rest of the night, please tell me in advance and I'll ask him to turn off his camera, or we'll make it easy. Out of the rest of the people that are signed up to read, including Mark Ducharme, do any of you guys have any objection to being recorded? Okay, and I sent out 50 or 100 emails inviting people to the Brad Will Memorial reading, and I got a couple emails back saying, dude, why don't you tell us who Brad Will is, or who's Brad Will, or why is he being memorialized, or what did Brad Will have to do with poetry? And so I thought I'd give you guys a quick primer. As Brad Will was a 36-year-old person who used to read at the Poetry Readings, this series, quite often in the mid to late 90s, 93, 94, 95. He was a summer writing program student in Europa, and since then he's been involved full-time as being an activist in all over the North America and maybe further. Friends with most of the teachers at Europa and most of the people that came to the readings at Penny Lane in the 90s. And he was killed by the police in Mexico about New York that he was getting behind. And he was really quite an individual. And it said in the paper that he was an Europa graduate. I know that he wasn't, only because I wrote his recommendation. And that year I'd recommended 3 people that didn't get accepted into the program. And I called over there and said, should I stop writing people recommendations? Because everyone I recommended this year was turned down. They were probably the only people turned down that year. It's like, is my recommendation hurting their chances of getting into school there? And Ann Waldman said that they couldn't do anything with glowing recommendations because it didn't really help if you said a lot of nice things about a person, because it didn't really help them figure out what kind of person they were, you know? Which is nothing against Ann. She's a great person, and she'll be paying tribute to Brad in New York at St. Mark's Church, where they're doing a 5-hour thing for him there on the 11th of this month, which is probably Saturday. And maybe they'll record that. But Brad was all those things, and a good guy. And my contribution to the night is that one of the other persons that didn't get accepted in Europa that year was Jeff Bauer, this guy who I felt so guilty that he didn't get into Europa that year that I gave him a job at my store. And he was like the least employable person that ever lived. He has 3 kids now, and he still has never had a full-time job in his life, unless you count working at the Beat Bookshop 4 hours a day. But he came out from Michigan in 1993 to come to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. He stopped in Telluride on the way back to Boulder. He was coming down McClure Pass, and the brakes went out on his 10-year-old car that he paid $400 for. And he scraped his car against the mountain to a stop and survived, luckily, you know, for his 3 kids and stuff like that. And so he pulled over on the side of the road and stuck his thumb out. And he's a clean-cut, good-looking kid that doesn't look like he could harm a fly. And all the people in Colorado drove by him, you know. And then a van pulled over and opened the door full of marijuana smoke. And Brad Will and his friends picked up Jeff and drove him to Boulder, where he was going from McClure Pass, and left. You know, he left his car, I think, on the side of the road forever. But he, you know, called the other day and was like crying about Brad and how nice this guy was to pick him up hitchhiking. And so that's just one of like the things of Brad being a nice enough guy to trust a stranger to pick him up, you know. Whatever you do, though, don't go picking up hitchhikers because you heard this story, because I know people that were also killed by hitchhikers and stuff like that. So you know, it's true stories. So Jeffrey Miller's brother was killed when he was picked up hitchhiking. So Brad was a good guy, and a lot of people are gonna read poems and dedicate their poems to him tonight. And we lost another person this week, Larissa Strickland, who played guitar at the Poetry Readings a few times in the early 90s with the Laughing Hyenas. She was 40 years old, and she died of an accidental overdose this weekend. but she also was another person that died this week that participated in the poetry readings in the 90s. So to Larissa and Brad, we're going to dedicate the rest of the night to Brad, and I'm going to dedicate a minute to Larissa. And our first poet in this portion of the evening is going to be Ola Tunji. Let's have a nice warm welcome for Ola Tunji.
I'm going to invite Clip Locks up here to help me. Prelude to Chance is a movie. Our days were grand, even in their illusions. And the evening felt warm, especially naked. I relished the touch of air flooding over my skin, my hair a field of wheat, waves, beautiful, vast. What if everything ever already occurred, and we find ourselves only on a few frames instead of the stars we would like ourselves to be? We are flip books purchased for 10 cents at the corner store. Our lives move like waves of grain, beautiful, vast only in the boundless ocean of imagination. Chance is a movie. The significance of chance cannot be overrated. As a movie, you may see a left made yesterday led to the right I made today, which made me 10 minutes late for the bus which crashed into a semi. It was all chance, you may say. I might have